Today, we're talking about how to have the love that your heart craves. And I was going through what Mark kind of put together here and have some amazing pillars here, 4 pillars to create a fulfilling relationship. Welcome here to the Thriving Marriage Podcast. I'm Heather Cho with Mark Johnston. How's it going, Mark?
I'm going to be honest here. Actually, I was just mentioning to Heather, I was like, man, the afternoon feels like it's dragging a bit here, but I'm glad to be here. Good to be here on the podcast with everyone here.
I hear you. My kids are just wound up. We are ready for some spring break and some spring weather. I'll tell you what. I homeschool now, so I have all 8 of them home with me basically all day, every day. And when the weather is crummy, we just tend to go a little stir crazy. So we're looking forward to getting out this afternoon as it's mildly nice today.
I don't know if you guys we just had snow over the last several days and it just started warming up. I don't know if things were similar for you. Heather and I live in different parts of the country.
Yeah.
So.
No snow for us, but we do get some, actually March is our highest snowfall of the year. So we tend to get some big storms and then it pretends to be spring and then it's winter and it just keeps going like that. Can't make up its mind. So today, my friends, welcome here to the Thriving Marriage Podcast. We are the #1 resource for couples in the world. And we want to thank each and every one of you for joining us in our mission to help millions of couples to have a thriving marriage. Today, we're talking about how to have the love that your heart craves. And I was going through what Mark kind of put together here and have some amazing pillars here, 4 pillars to create a fulfilling relationship. And guys, this works even if your spouse wants out, having an affair, multiple affairs, wanting a divorce, say they're unwilling to work on things with you, say, I love you, but I'm not willing to work on this, or I don't love you, and all of the above. And so that is what we help couples do. Now we have helped tens of thousands of couples now around the world with this method. So we're excited to share it with you. I want to make sure you guys stay to the end because we're really going to dive into how a lot of people get this totally wrong and how you have a big opportunity to get it right. Even if maybe everything you've tried up until this point really hasn't worked the way that you wanted it to, this is definitely going to be for you. Before we get to that, though, we're going to share our client win of the week. I'll share this one, if that's okay, Mark, and you can add to it. This is an anonymous one. Win. We finally connected tonight about what he meant when he said relationship work and are working on a game plan together to help us move forward. I'm still working through the modules here, but together we will be doing something else. Our first night is tomorrow night.
Wow.
And so here's someone that's going through either our coaching program or our course talking about the modules. And that they are really finally connecting, which is a little bit deeper into the process. If you are in a situation where your spouse is really pulling away, we first want to have them hit the pause button and then really start to build some of that connection. And so they're going through this process.
Well, I think this highlights something important here. I know a lot of what we talk about is, especially, if you've seen some of our advertisements or just some of the marketing type stuff, we talk a lot about like fix the marriage on your own. And to a certain extent, yeah, that's accurate. Ultimately, though, I think what like the primary goal is to calm things down, to get things into a situation where your partner will work on things together. And it's a huge step because that means that the relationship then is going from like this stagnant place or this place where you're slowly drifting apart or quickly drifting apart. And now the momentum is heading in a completely different direction where you're actually going forward together. And that's a huge, huge step. So, I'm always excited when I hear about these sort of situations where they've made that leap because it usually, from my experience, it seems to turn out well from that point going forward.
Agreed. It kind of hits that tipping point. It's kind of like a slow climb. And then all of a sudden it hits that tipping point and then you're into a lot of momentum from there. And so it's a beautiful thing to witness. So thank you for sharing your win there. All right. So Mark, what are we talking about today? What do you feel like people are really wanting? Like the word, like the Okay, now I'm going to get tongue-tied. The feeling of like what our heart is really craving, this yearning for love, this yearning for acceptance, this yearning for connection is lacking in so many relationships.
Yes.
I've talked about it a lot recently on the podcast and in masterclasses and with you guys. And the statistics show that our society is not supporting having healthy relationships. Over 50% are ending in divorce. Of those that stayed married, only 8% report being happy, which means there's a staggering 92% of couples out there that are not happy. They do not feel accepted in their own relationship. They do not feel like they are giving or receiving the love that really we're all craving as human beings. What's really going on here? Why do so many of us lack this?
Well, we kind of put a feeler question out there a little bit. Just recently there was a question about like what's holding your relationship back when it comes to reconciliation. And I thought that would be a good place to start. Some people were talking about, how there's communication issues. They talked about how there's an affair, or like here are these big events, these things that are going on, or maybe it's about like they won't even talk to me, or I'm ready, but they're not. And I was thinking about this. I was like, okay, well, is there some collective way to describe all this? Is there, because this sounds like so many different issues going on when I really think there's some commonality, whether it's an affair or a lack of trust, or there's lost love and connection, or poor conflict resolution skills, poor communication, or whatever it happens to be. Like, that's way too many problems to be dealing with. And I don't know, like, well, Heather, you've worked with me for a while. I like to say, what's the unifying factor? Where's the thread that kind of ties all this together? And that's like a lot of what I wanted to talk about today. So I was like, okay. We've talked about like our PATH program. I was like, okay, well, what are like the main things? What are the main pillars that would create a happy and healthy relationship? And I thought about this for a bit. I looked at some other people, a lot of other experts have these sort of ideas out there. I know like Gottman has, what's it called? It's like it's something about a house. It's the Gottman, I'm going to have to look it up. We're going to look it up here because it has a specific name. It was the Sound Relationship House. That's right. And so I looked at like some things like that, and I looked at a few other people, their pillars. I was like, well, as odd as it sounds, I was like, does Gottman really have it right? And it sounds a little bit blasphemous to even like to ask that question. But I was like, well, does this really encompass our audience and what they're experiencing and what they're looking for? And I was like, well, maybe not. So I was like, okay, well, what does create a happy and healthy relationship? And I kind of concluded like there's 4 main pillars. And I wanted to discuss this today. Like, what is the discrepancy, the difference between where a lot of you are at and having like really good, solid foundation with these pillars? So these pillars are fulfillment. Like, are your main emotional needs met? Is there healthy feedback and conflict resolution? Is there intimacy or closeness? Not just sexual intimacy, but all sorts of intimacy. And is there a positive narrative or perspective? And I thought, these really tied in well some of our own principles. It tied in a lot of the other ideas that I saw from other experts. And I was like, hey, this is a nice little neat package here. And I thought this would be a good topic to discuss today. So that's what I wanted to talk about, is like, how do we close the gap between the love you want and your current situation centered around some of these pillars here?
Love that.
Yeah.
And so as we're looking at this, your situation is very likely where it is because one or more of these pillars that Mark just mentioned are lacking. It's missing one of these, or one of these is not in a healthy, functional state right now. And maybe it's come to the point where you or your partner are considering divorce. And then it's very likely that the situation has been slowly building up over years. Mark, you once put it like all these little bits of micro damage then lead to some macro damage when they're not properly healed and these issues are not addressed. But the point is that you can get back to the point where you have love again by addressing the issues within each of these pillars. And we're going to go deep into this. And I think it's going to be really fun. We're going to go as deep as we can, but it's still kind of a high level overview of the whole process. And that's what we do in our one-on-one coaching, is actually go into your exact situation and into the exact issues that need to be resolved within your relationship. Before we go into the 4 pillars though, Mark, I just want to do a bit of a self-mindset question, okay? And I want to ask you guys, why do you want what you really want? When you're thinking about the love that your heart is craving, why are you craving that? Why are you wanting that? And listen to whatever answer comes first and say, it's because I don't want to feel rejected. Okay. Now I want you to say, well, why don't I want to feel rejected? And I want you to keep asking these questions until you go 6 levels deep, 6 layers deep into this. Because there's a difference between wanting to feel loved because it's an amazing, beautiful, blissful feeling, and wanting to feel loved to fill a gap in yourself, or to feel like I'm not good enough unless people love me and give me that love and fill those gaps that I'm lacking myself, right? Or I actually feel really insecure. And I feel like if others loved me, if my spouse loved me, then that would fill that need for that insecurity. It would give me that feeling of security. So this is where we all have these like core desires here. And we're going to talk about some of them with fulfillment, especially, but we don't even often understand why we're wanting what we're wanting. And if you're coming from a place of lack and neediness, and I'm not good enough, I'm not complete, I'm broken, and you're wanting someone else to fill that for you, then you're not coming at it from the place that's actually going to create wholeness and wellness in your life or in their life. Okay. And so I just wanted to start with a bit of a preface there to really examine why you're wanting what you're wanting. Now, it's not to say it's bad, but it's just good awareness. It's just good feedback to say, I want love here because it hurts to be rejected. It hurts to know that they're sleeping with someone else and that I'm not good enough. That's a very different place than I feel complete and whole in myself, and I want to experience even greater love and connection with another human being, right? And so that's some of the things that Mark and I do at the deepest level, is help you understand why you're wanting what you're wanting, where you're really coming from. Examine some of your core like motives and desires and see if they're really as, the word that comes to my mind is pure, like if they're really as good or healthy as they could be. And if you recognize that your desires for more love or increased connection, increased security come from a place of insecurity or lacking of your own needs being filled, then that's something that you'd want to address to get to the healthiest place possible.
Absolutely. I 100% agree.
So, Mark, let's go a little bit deeper into these 6 basic emotional needs and how, when we do get our own needs met, that a relationship, marriage can add to that and create a deep level of this kind of fulfillment.
Sure. Yeah, so that's pillar 1, is that fulfillment. And, I think a great place to, we could approach it from many different angles. And sometimes people talk about this from like love languages or other theories that really provide for more fulfillment in the relationship. We could even go back to just the one I mentioned, the Gottman's sound relationship house. Like, we're basically within a relationship. Do you feel, does the relationship allow for and support for your needs? Support your needs. So I just happen to like the theory of 6 basic emotional needs. This one is put out by Chloe Madonna. She works with Tony Robbins, is my understanding. And she talks about needs for certainty, which is sometimes about comfort or security, or uncertainty, which is sometimes about variety or fun. Needs for connection, which can sometimes be described as belonging or love. Needs for significance or respect, is sometimes what it's called. And also needs for growth and contribution. Miss Madonna's, she puts out these needs, and she says, okay, the more that these needs are met within a relationship, the more fulfilling that relationship is, and the more likely that someone is going to be attracted to that relationship and keep coming back. And if any of these needs are blocked or unfulfilled, people tend to scramble a bit. They tend to turn towards some unhealthy behavior in order to get these needs met. And in my opinion, like if we're looking at this question, like how do you have the love that your heart craves? Like if you're saying like, how do we actually get this love back? A question that I frequently ask my clients is like, okay, what kind of patterns in your relationship prevent the specific needs from being met? So if, I was just talking to someone earlier where the issue is financial security. Okay, well, why is that an issue? It seems like, there's an easy answer in these situations that say, okay, we'll go do some financial planning, maybe go talk to an accountant, maybe set aside more money for debt, whatever. There's some easy solutions, but there's something within that relationship that was preventing there from being more regular financial security. And that's like the important thing to look at. So a question to ask yourself, which need or needs do you think are lacking in your relationship? What patterns have been, have developed over the years that prevent these needs from being met or, blocks these needs? I mean, we've talked about this for a while, haven't we, Heather? We've talked about these specific needs before.
Yeah. And helping our clients understand, maybe the security just keeps getting demolished because of, lines being drawn and then crossed and trust being broken. And you continue to find yourself in the hamster wheel going round and round and round. And meanwhile, the relationship is maybe deteriorating more and more and more. And at the root of it is that those needs are not being met and that there aren't patterns that are sustaining those needs being met in healthy ways. There's some dysfunctional patterns that have been going on that have been creating that. And that's a lot what we talk about at like the root issue versus the symptom. And you guys may have heard us say this before, but a lot of people tend to focus on those symptoms. You tend to focus on maybe what your spouse is saying or what they're doing. Even a lot of very well-meaning therapists or other people out there tend to focus on, let's just stop the affair or let's just stop this addiction, and not really understanding what's driving that addictive behavior or what's driving this affair. And so when we look at what the root cause is, that's when we can create real change. And it's amazing, I think, when we put down our weapons and our armor and we kind of look at each other for who we really are, we realize that we all are wanting the same things. And that's what I'm talking about here, is that we're all wanting certainty. We're all wanting variety. We're all wanting fun. We're all wanting connection. We're all wanting significance, growth, and contribution. We are all wanting those same things. And it is an interesting point in a relationship when you realize that your spouse actually wants those same things that you do. Because oftentimes we think, oh, we couldn't be further apart right now. They're wanting this, they're wanting to leave, they're wanting to go, whatever, live in a trailer and travel the world, who knows, right? And I want stability with my family. We don't want the same things at all, right? But actually at the root of who you really are and what you're both wanting, you actually do want very much the same things.
Yeah. And so like, this is absolutely, I think, one pillar that needs to be there. And if this is missing, if there are needs missing, it's going to cause some issues. And you need to look at this, like what kind of needs has our relationship blocked and how do we resolve that? So our second pillar, I think, here is about healthy feedback and conflict resolution. So, hey, if the needs aren't being met, how do you talk about it?
Yeah.
And I think like absolutely integral part to any long-term stable relationship. Wouldn't you say so, Heather?
Absolutely. And that's why we always want to solve problems in order, because a lot of people want to try to start immediately with communication, and they say, oh, our just communication is really bad. And yeah, your communication might not be great, but if we don't even know what we're really trying to resolve or what we're trying to work towards, then, we got to uncover that first. So really understanding how well you and your partner resolve problems together. There's, again, some patterns of communication that are very much tied to those same underlying core emotional needs.
Mm-hmm.
Like, do you tend to sweep problems under the rug? Do you tend to avoid issues? I was just talking to a couple like that. They have a pretty decent marriage, but they're wanting to get to the next level. But she's like, I can never talk to him about anything because he just immediately shuts down. Yep. And so we never actually resolve any issues. And we've been married 14 years. And I feel like we're in the exact same place that we were on year 2. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. We also see escalating arguments. So they turn into shouting matches or really nasty words, maybe a lot of blaming and accusations and kind of fighting fire with fire, right? Yeah. Maybe turning disagreements into a competition, maybe where someone's right and someone's wrong. And you have to try to win the argument, or they have to feel like they have to try to win the argument, but really you both end up losing because nothing ever is really resolved.
There's a lot of there's a lot of things that can contribute to this sort of pillar breaking down, like all those things that you listed right there. I think some big questions to consider if you're trying to build it back up is there room for people to express where they could use support? Or, is there an ability for either of you to talk about things that you would like to be different? I think those, when we really break it down, it's those two things. What do you want to improve? What do you want to be different? And I think a common area where this does break down, we get into some of Gottman's indicators for divorce, where it comes across as criticism or complaint. People come forward and they say, well, you're doing this and you're doing that, and why can't you be different? When really they're trying to come about this, trying to provide feedback, trying to express that they want some things to be different in an unhealthy way. Mm-hmm. And I think that is, I don't know if you would agree with me, but I think that's the most frequent breakdown of this pillar is requests aren't really voiced well. They come across as complaints, and then people just kind of don't handle the complaints very well. And either it's avoided or it escalates or whatever happens to be.
Right. And yes, I agree with you, Mark. I tend to agree with you in most things because you're brilliant. Okay.
Yeah.
You're an international marriage coach for a reason. But I was just talking to another couple, and it was the same thing where she felt she had to mother him because she didn't like his laziness, or she didn't like what he was doing. So it was her job now to kind of boss him and get him to try to change and to do more to help around the house, and got into the whole kind of mothering role that sometimes we see as another pattern there, right? Of one kind of dominating the other one, or trying to boss the other one, or try to get the other one to change. If we really look at what's wanted behind that, is that they are wanting something to change. They are wanting needs to be met better. But like Mark said, they're going about it in an unhealthy way that really leaves everyone frustrated. Right.
Well, and I think there's that one side where is the request being communicated well? But then there's the other side here where okay, how well is the other partner following through on some of that feedback? Are they actually doing something with it? Are they making some adjustments? Are they supporting the partner who made the request in the first place? And that's another common breakdown. We talk about sweeping things under the rug, and so a complaint goes out there, and it's just we'll just put it aside. It's not that big of a deal. It's not that important. And I hear all the time people say, hey, I had no idea it was quite so serious as all this. And now there's a call for divorce. Yeah. Exactly. Yep. So, if we look at this, there's a lot of different things that can really break it down, whether it's negative reactions to feedback, a lot of extreme emotions around feedback, or just an unwillingness to sit with feedback or do anything with it. But as you're considering trying to get to that love that you're looking for, what part of this process, this pillar, isn't working well? What part is working well? Potentially, maybe this is a really strong part of your relationship. But like, it's good to identify these sort of things here as you're rebuilding your marriage.
Yeah. Another thing to look at is like, what was modeled to me in my home growing up with my parents? How did they communicate about problems? Was I able to give feedback to my family about things that were maybe an issue? How well did I receive feedback? And we can see things all across the spectrum there. And it's been a journey. I'll just say that on this part with my marriage personally, because like most of you, there weren't the most healthy patterns modeled to me on how to handle conflict or how to receive. I saw a lot of pride of you. Who are you to tell me what to do? And I'm not going to change. And that pride really comes from a deeper level of insecurity, right? There's a healthy level of humility to say, you may have a point. I'm going to think about that. I'm going to consider what you said, and I'm going to contemplate that, and then examine yourself and be like, is there truth to what they just said? Yeah, there probably is some truth, or maybe I don't see it yet. So I want to understand better where they're coming from, because I do want to be a good partner here. I do want to show understanding and respect and meet their needs and all those things. Right. I've also seen the other end of the spectrum of the pride of where they're so hypersensitive that you say anything and they immediately go into like major depression, maybe even threatening suicide. Like, I'm such a horrible person and da, 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 da. And it's another manipulation to try to get you not to criticize them. So there's so many different ways that this can show up, but really learning how to set down old patterns and really understand each other. I like the analogy of, instead of us against them, right? Like, we're at each other, it's you and I against this issue. And we're working together as a team to overcome this thing. You're not the enemy. I'm not the enemy. The only thing that needs to change here is this issue. And so how can we do that together? How would you like to do it? How would I like to do it? And then you go into that healthy dialogue, that feedback, the give and the take. I think for me, a lot of it came to just becoming more secure with myself. I think a lot of the inability to give and receive feedback comes from deep-rooted insecurity. And when you become more secure in who you are, you have a bit of a humility of saying, I'm okay to be told that I did something wrong, or I'm okay for you to say that I hurt you. And I'm going to be willing to take that and use that feedback to become better, right? So for me, the more secure I became, the more I was able to handle feedback from Ben, and also to have a healthy place to come from to give feedback to him as well.
I think that's some great insight. You're absolutely right. Like, whether it is issues receiving feedback or issues giving feedback, it is a lot about self, like how secure you feel in yourself. I was exploring that. I was like, thinking about that as you were talking. I was like, yeah, that really hits home for me right there. I don't know. I was like,
it's a good one.
Yeah,
all right. So, yeah, thanks. And that brings us to our third pillar here, which is closeness. And I like how these, I don't know if it's intentional, I'm assuming it probably was, how they build on each other here, Mark, because we talk about meeting each other's needs, having that level of fulfillment. So we're not scrambling to try to get our needs met, and then working on how to communicate about needs, how to communicate and give it and receive feedback. And then as we do that more and more, we really create that intimacy loop, right? We talk about it's an intimacy cycle. So Mark, what do you see when it comes to intimacy? What are we really talking about? Because there's some misunderstanding about this word, right?
Yeah. So and you're right. Like, so there's some connection to these pillars. So if it's about needs, then how do we communicate about these needs? This is about how deep are these needs? So it's a lot. This is a big description of like how open and accepting you and your partner are towards each other, but like how deep the relationship is. Because on one level, you can have some connection and some respect or significance, some certainty within a relationship. But if you have that at low levels, well, what do you have? You have an okay friendship. If you have it at very low levels, you have like, okay, well, this is an acquaintance that I can get along with. And I imagine that's not what most of you are aiming for when you're thinking, yeah, this is what I want in my marriage. And so there is some requirement for a happy, healthy relationship to have some depth to it. and I don't know if I actually need to explain this because I think we're all adults. We understand the meaning of the word, but when I talk to people, they still use this euphemism of intimacy. They say, well, we were intimate the other night. And so like as a euphemism, like another way of saying that sex, and that's not what we're talking about. While intimacy does include sex, that's one form of intimacy. For long-term committed couples, I would actually say emotional intimacy tends to be more important. I think like all the other things, like this is my personal opinion. I'm just going to say, hey, I recognize for other people at different times, other forms of intimacy can be important. But like for long-term couples, I think that emotional intimacy is probably the most important piece. Like simply because I think it can feel really draining to feel as though you can't share who you are, how you feel, for both men and women. And while there's like this big stereotype here that men aren't as in tune with their feelings and are not as comfortable with them, we see here every day what happens when people push feelings down for too many years, or they're not in touch with their feelings. It comes out in weird ways, either as affairs or drifting apart or lack of ability to communicate. And I think for me, this all can be summed up with like how healthy is that, especially emotional intimacy, but just intimacy in general. So I think that's like really a lot of what this entails here. What about like what creates situations where intimacy shuts down, Heather? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so intimacy definitely shuts down when there really isn't time or priority or maybe even value given to the relationship. If you guys aren't nurturing it, it's just like anything out there. My daughters want to try to grow some tree seeds they found on the road. Don't know if that's going to work, but the analogy there, whatever you plant, if you want it to grow and flourish and thrive, you can't just water it for a week and think that that's going to keep it healthy for life, right? But there is some misunderstanding about there that the honeymoon phase should just carry throughout the entire marriage effortlessly. And if it doesn't, then there's something wrong with us. And it's not true, right? That whole, I love you, but I'm not in love with you. And it's really about, am I giving time to this relationship? Am I nurturing it? And do I value it? Do I prioritize it? Do I prioritize meeting my spouse's needs, maybe over other people's needs? If, that's often very appropriate in the relationship. Especially if maybe you felt some levels of rejection, where maybe you wanted to share about your life or share something really personal or meaningful to you, and maybe your partner just turned you down. Maybe they dismissed it. Maybe they just were distracted and didn't give you any attention about it, or maybe they flat out like criticized you about it. And so as you felt rejection of any kind, that then puts up the walls and tends to shut down our desire to put ourselves out there again, right? It's really normal. And then being open or intimate, if you are like that and you're showing that vulnerability and you're feeling unsafe, again, criticism, contempt, intense negative emotions. When you put yourself out there and your partner's like, no, not interested, and you continue to do that, you kind of feel like the dog that just keeps getting kicked every time. And then you just don't want to go there anymore. And we see this happen a lot. So we talked about the intimacy loop. This is the intimacy loop when it's heading in the wrong direction, right? Of these cycles of, I don't get what I want here, so I don't feel safe to give you what you want, or I'm even going to withdraw from you, maybe to punish you or to show you that wasn't okay. And then they feel rejected by us. They feel hurt or like we were stonewalling them. And then they withdraw and affection from us even more. And then we feel rejected. And it just builds this really nasty cycle of more and more disconnection. Mark, what have you seen as far as intimacy that tends to shut down?
I think that it all boils down to that acceptance. We see this early on in relationships. It can be really exciting. Hey, I shared this little tidbit about myself, and they responded very positively. Hey, I reached out to show some attraction, and what happened? They responded positively. I don't know if you can remember your first date. I can remember my first date, and I share this like story with like my clients. I'm like, it was a big moment when, like, Jen and I, we went out on a date, we were seeing a movie, and I was like, yeah, I'm going to put my arm around her. I'm going to see what happens. And she just kind of nuzzled into me. I was like, that felt awesome. So like, what you're asking here about is like, okay, what's the opposite? How does this break down? Is these little moments, these little bids for closeness, where I put when one puts themselves out there and you get a negative response. That's how these sort of things slowly wilt and die and drift apart. You explained it as the intimacy loop, and it can go one way or the other. Absolutely.
Right. So the good news is now you guys know how it can deteriorate. So of course, the opposite is true on how to build it up. So when your partner puts themselves out there and you accept them and you receive that, it gives them that positive feedback and makes them feel safe and encouraged to do more of that. And when you put yourself out there and that's received, then you are then encouraged to do more of that. We talk about that, that feedback that we just talked about in the second pillar there, right? Healthy feedback and conflict resolution. I'll be honest, it's really hard for my husband to say, this bothers me, or to say, I was kind of upset when you did this, because in our past, right, had shut him down. And for whatever reason, unintentionally made him feel like that wasn't safe to talk about, because I would make it a bigger issue because, like I mentioned, my own insecurity, right? And so after several years of this, it got to the point where he didn't really want to bring up anything. And I was like, well, that's not going to get us anywhere we want to be, right? And so as I learned these things, over the past years and started applying them to my own relationship, every time he would start to say, like I was hurt or this made me upset, I would thank him for being willing to share and say, I respect you. And I'm grateful that you told me that. And then that made him feel a little more safe the next time. And then the next time, and then the next time. And at the beginning, he would say, this is really scary and hard for me to do. But now he truly doesn't say that anymore, because I've worked on building up the intimacy and the trust to make him feel secure and safe, and to eliminate those elements of rejection, right? So that's a little bit how to get things going in the right direction. How do you guys think that this applies to you? And can you see how you can use this in your marriage right now? Leave a comment, let us know. Mark, a lot of these, our amazing friends here listening to us, they're going to be in a place where maybe their spouse isn't opening a lot up to them a lot, maybe isn't communicating a lot, has some very big, strong barriers, isn't sharing a lot of intimate closeness with them. How does this really apply to them?
Well, I find that there's a couple of mistakes that tend to happen in these situations. Is people tend to expect old levels of intimacy they say, okay, that's the solution. If I jump back in and say, I love you, I have this undying love and we'll never be apart, they say, well, if love was missing, that's what needs to be expressed. And my experience is it tends to be too much of a jump if you're trying to build up intimacy again. I also see that there are bids for intimacy that aren't recognized in these situations. And going back to like the feedback, like complaints come out, some of this negativity comes out, and as odd as it sounds, like it makes sense to say, okay, I'm going to fight against that. I'm going to say no to that. But like, these are unhealthy bids to say, hey, I want some things to be different. And if we shut that down, it's going to further shut down intimacy. And if we're trying to build up intimacy again, you might need to start in some of those dark areas and be open to some of those dark things first, and have some acceptance and some understanding around there first, is I think a great place to start with intimacy.
That was so good. I hope you guys got goosebumps like I did listening to that, because that was amazing. And so, yeah, that's a really great place to start. I see the same thing, Mark, that so many of us are unintentionally pushing our spouse further away. And you think that the situation is really, really hopeless and that there's really nothing you can do. But like Mark just said here, there are these bids for intimacy that you may just be missing right now. And so that's why it's so valuable to actually work with an expert that knows how to point those out so that you can make the best of that opportunity, because there's so much more there than you possibly realize is going on.
I don't even think most people complaining recognize it for what it's at. Like wouldn't say that they would say, yeah, this is a bid for intimacy, but it is in some small ways. They're saying, this is something I'm concerned about. Would you please listen to it? And, if it's shut down, that's a big problem.
Yeah. So there's that. And there's also the not making too big of leaps too soon. We see, people pushing for big, displays of intimacy and love and affection and big displays of commitment. And if your spouse is pulling away, most likely it's going to backfire or just be absolutely ineffective. And so what we do is really different. We take you from exactly where you are. I don't know if you guys remember, right at the beginning of the testimonial here, we talked about how it's a little bit of that slow, process up the hill to getting to that point, that milestone of now they're wanting to have some connection with you. And that's kind of that tipping point where then you get into a lot of momentum. But we see a lot of people trying to go from 0 to 60 in one breath, and it just does not work. And then you think, oh, there's nothing I can do. I can't save my marriage. That's not true. You just got to do it in the right way.
Yes.
All right. Now we talk a lot about this last one here. Right, Mark, which is super important. You guys make sure you do not miss this. If your spouse has not hit the pause button yet, if they have not fully reconciled and recommitted to you, then like we said, you're missing one or more of these pillars. And especially pay attention to this last one, which is having a positive narrative or perspective, basically telling a new story about you and the relationship.
Yeah, we talk a lot, especially when we're talking about our PATH program, about that perspective piece and about that story piece. Even some of the other parts, like taking some action and building up some hope or some positive mindset, it all kind of connects to this pillar, I think, quite a bit. We could talk about this from many different theories. I'll pull in Gottman again. He talks about things that move things closer to divorce, criticism and contempt. Is a lot about building up a negative narrative or perspective. And so, if you're talking about how do we create some love again in the relationship, it's important for couples to work towards a positive view of each other. And I know the flippant remark that you probably are getting from your spouse, like, well, I could have a positive view about you if you weren't such a terrible person, because of whatever problem they're saying. That's difficult. It's hard to build up a positive perspective when those complaints are out there, but there are things that can be done. Like I said, the alternative is these, like if we're talking about like what breaks it down, it's mostly from criticism, contempt. And this pillar is really heavily affected by, it really affects that default view that you and your partner have of each other. Sometimes I refer to this as having like a lens over the situation. So I know a lot of people talk about having a rose tinted lens. I mean, this is the opposite. I don't know what color we'd be talking about. Like a nasty yellow brown.
Yeah, that'd be a good one. A puke orange. I don't
know. Muddy water lens over this. So, and that's what I like. I can imagine that you all can think of those happier times in your marriage when you're like, okay, I could let a little bit more slide, and my partner let a little bit more slide because they assumed the best in me. And, a big part of this is because most any interaction can be viewed and judged in a whole lot of different ways. An argument could be viewed as, okay, we're trying to discuss differences and we're going to come to a good conclusion together, to my partner doesn't listen to me. They don't care about what I have to say. And it might be two people viewing the same situation and viewing it completely different. So if you're going to have that healthy marriage and move back towards love, this is almost like a separate factor. Like you need to work on viewing your partner positively. Sometimes that's about taking action. And sometimes that's about examining beliefs and saying, okay, what needs to shift here? Like consciously choosing a different perspective on some of these things. It's a complicated issue. This is, we put it in part of the PATH program here. Heather, we put in part of, these pillars. This is not like hey, we're going to talk about this for 5 minutes and that's it. Right? Yeah. What are your thoughts here? Like, sir? Yeah. What are your thoughts?
So this was the big breakthrough that Mark and I had several years ago. Actually, Mark, you did. I won't take the credit for it, but when you shared it with me, I was like, yes. We'd been working with, several thousand clients already. And we realized that you could make all the positive changes in the world. You could work on yourself. You could be more listening. You could be more patient, more present. You could change your career. You could be home earlier. You could be trying to meet your spouse's every single need. And they would still think the same thing about you that they did 6 months ago. And they either wouldn't notice the changes or they would see them and not believe them. They'd think it's just a manipulation to try to get them back. Or, if they do come back, then it's just going to go back to the way it was and they're not going to be happy. And we realized that we could get clients to a certain point of even having respect, even having reduced tension, even having more friendship. But unless we helped their spouse fully let that story go about them, then they wouldn't be able to move forward towards the full reconciliation of the marriage, right? And so that's why it's so vital that we address this in the proper way. Again, we don't have time to go deeper into this, but it's something we're continuously working on with our clients throughout the whole process. So if they let that story go, they don't no longer see you as everything you do is negative. They actually see you for who you really are, and they see the possibility of being happy with you. So, Mark, these pillars are amazing. Why do you feel like they are so important?
Well, I like to reverse engineer a couple of things, some things. And so when I got to the question, when it's time to prepare for the podcast, like, how do we actually get the love that people are looking for? I was like, well, what actually creates a happy, fulfilling relationship? And it comes down to this. And, honestly, when I'm working with clients and we're saying, okay, well, what needs to be worked on? Almost always it comes back to one or more of these issues. It's just these ideas keep coming up over and over again. And I'm not going to say like this encompasses everything, but I would say that, we could probably place a lot of action that needs to be taken into one or more of these pillars, and most every single case that we work with. And that's why these are so important.
Yeah. So you guys go ahead and comment on these pillars within your own marriage, and perhaps maybe how they've broken down for you or for people in your life, and which ones you feel like are really going to help you going in a good direction. And then if you guys want to know where to start with any of these pillars, I want to just have you guys imagine something for a minute here. Imagine really having the love that your heart is craving, right? Imagine really knowing that you are accepted for who you are, and that you can have this deep intimacy and closeness, that you can feel safe and secure in your relationship. Imagine how good it feels to have their arms wrapped around you, even as you guys are falling in love with each other again, not in the old relationship actually, but in a brand new relationship that's healthier and more functional than ever. Imagine hearing them say those words that maybe you've been longing to hear of, I'm sorry, I made a big mistake. Please take me back. I love you. I want to be with you, right? And imagine that feeling of contentment, knowing that your marriage is where you want it to be, of being able to just go anywhere you want to go, do anything you want to do, and knowing that it's going to be okay. And not just going back to the same relationship that you had before, but creating a brand new relationship of being able to see each other with fresh eyes, being able to kind of wipe the slate clean, right? Of, yeah, that was what happened in the past, but here I'm able to see you with brand new, fresh eyes, and be able to have their commitment to you. And that it's not just you chasing after them, but this is truly their idea. They want to commit with you. They want to be with you, and they never want to lose you again. That is a very different place than where most people go about this whole situation, right? So imagine how good that will feel to be there and to have the love that your heart really craves. And if you guys are wanting that and you're committed to getting there, then comment me, and we will see if coaching is a good fit to help get you there. All right. We're going to skip our marriage myth buster today for sake of time, but this was so valuable. And I'm really grateful that we took time to go deep into these 4 pillars. Again, I hope this was so valuable for you guys listening. Thank you so much, Mark. And next week, we're going to share with you how to recognize gaslighting behaviors in your marriage. So thank you guys for joining us today, and we cannot wait to see your marriage thrive.
Thanks for listening to The Thriving Marriage, your A to Z blueprint for not just surviving marriage, but thriving. Until next time, my friends, thrive on.